Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why No One Plays, featuring Sejuani, the Fury of the North. Seems lately I'm covering a lot of champions from Freljord. I have no idea why. Just might be coincidence, not sure. If this is your first time watching Why No One Plays, I have a disclaimer on screen for all the Sejuani mains out there that this is not a personal attack on you or your champion. My goal with this series is to raise more awareness of champions with low pick rates and analyze why their gameplay or design doesn't appeal to the general player base. And hopefully at the end of the video I can convince some of you guys to pick her up. But before we begin, I'd like to thank Aphrow for sponsoring my channel once again. If you find yourself experiencing lag in games while your browser's up, specifically Google Chrome, Aphrow is a web browser optimized for PC gamers. The main draw is the GX control, which shows you exactly how much PC usage your tab's background processes are taking up, and it allows you to allocate a set amount of resources to your browser to save energy and performance. This also includes internet, so if you're experiencing ping spikes, it might be due to a tab on your browser that's eating a lot of your bandwidth capacity. They also have the GX player. Now you can log on to Spotify, Apple, and YouTube Music from the left-hand sidebar, so you can have all your music streaming services in one place. Of course, whenever you're watching a video on YouTube or watching Twitch, the player pauses for your convenience, so if you're big on listening to music online, this can help save you a few steps. And this goes without saying, since all gamers pretty much use Discord and Twitch nowadays, you can access them as well as other DM apps like WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger on the left-hand side, so you don't have to open up a new tab. They're always available for you when you need them. Finally, try your hand at Aphrow GX's customization. You can change the neon color palette of the browser, or even set your desktop wallpaper or other wallpapers for the browser too. They come with their own built-in tools such as a VPN, ad blocker, tracking blocker, and even cryptocurrency wallet if you're into that. If you routinely struggle with browser issues, whether Google Chrome or Firefox whatnot, I highly suggest you give this browser a try by clicking the link in the description. It would support the channel a ton, but without further ado, time to get started with why no one plays Sejuani. I would say out of all junglers in the game, tanks run into the most trouble with balance because they can either only be really amazing or worthless. The jungle meta has seen its fair share of tempestuous changes relative to champions in top and mid lane. Out of the 5 roles, jungle is the most volatile, with support following after. At any point in time, there's usually one of 3 types of metas: tank meta, mage meta, and skirmisher meta, or also known as assassin meta. For the past couple seasons, and it's currently running right now, skirmishers are doing the best. We have champions like Hecarim, Rek'Sai, Elise, Xin, Udyr, and Kha'Zix with really strong win rates and pick rates alike. And that's likely how we're gonna stay with for a while unless Riot ever decides to bring back tank meta, but I'd say we have a better chance of getting struck by lightning than that happening. There never really is a dedicated mage meta, as they're almost always a viable pick. I mean, long ago, only very select AP champions could be fielded in jungle because they had long cooldowns and low attack damage, but nowadays almost every jungler can full clear before 3 minutes without taking any damage, so there that is. A mage meta would usually entail Elise, Talia, Fiddlesticks, Gragas, Echo, Nidalee, and whatnot, although half of them are sort of built as assassins to begin with. Then there's tanks. There are usually 2 subclasses of tanks in the jungle, the first being fighter tanks or juggernauts and bruiser tanks. These champions generally build full tank but deal significant amounts of damage, especially to squishy targets, those champions being Udyr, Volibear, and the recent tank Hecarim build. Then we have what I like to call dedicated tanks, whose primary focus is to be as beefy as possible and to lay down as much crowd control and area disruption in a fight. Nunu, Rammus, Zac, and of course our very own Sejuani. Sejuani actually used to be like the most broken tank in the game at one point. During the start of tank meta in mid-season 5, she received a huge buff that made her do ridiculous amounts of percent health damage on her W. Combine this with her insane engage and incredible resilience, she probably would have made Hecarim and Udyr at the start of the season look like B-tier champions. But then for the mid-season update in Season 7, Sejuani, Maokai, and Zac got reworked, with the pig waifu getting arguably the most amount of changes. Without going into too much detail, she lost a lot of AoE and burst damage in favor of gaining more durability, single target crowd control, and slightly better sustained damage. At the time, this was a direct buff to her gameplay since her already spectacular defense got even better. And with the new permafrost, she now had a way to apply crowd control outside of her initial engage with her ultimate. But over time, Riot nerfed her when they realized just how good she was, which caused her to lose a lot of her toughness and crowd control given that permafrost went from a 2-second stun to 1 second. They also cut down her passive's percent health damage, which was where most of her DPS came from. Even though her damage and disruption was still technically better than her old version, that only applied in really long extended teamfights, which was the meta back then. We were in a tank meta. Now, of course, that's no longer the case. See, the way they changed Sejuani made her a lot worse in solo queue but better in pro play. She lost a significant amount of front-loaded burst damage, and her stuns and knockups can now only strike one person at a time. But this was more than compensated by making her quite possibly the tankiest champion in all of League of Legends, until that got nerfed, which resulted in a net negative outcome for Sejuani. She was always a pretty slow champion design-wise, slow dash speed, slow projectile speed, slow attacks, and whatnot. But then they flattened her damage output to make her more of a juggernaut than a diver. That came back to bite her several years later, as Sejuani is a champion who's aging very poorly. She was one of the most dangerous tanks in the game due to her massive teamfight potential. Arctic Assault had a relatively long cooldown even for a dash, and it was pretty slow while not dealing that much damage. But it was similar to Gragas' Body Slam and AoE displacement with a fat hitbox, only hers traveled a little farther and broke through minions, whereas Gragas would get stopped by them. The current version does more damage but can now only hit one target, and it actually has a longer cooldown than it did before. Overall, this ability was nerfed quite badly because whenever crowd control goes from single target to AoE or AoE to single target, that is a massive change in the champion's dynamic and their impact in a fight. But what really screwed her over in my opinion was the change made to her ultimate Glacial Prison. Currently, it fires a bola of ice in front of her. If it strikes a champion, they take magic damage and are stunned for 1 second. But if it travels a far enough distance, it deals more than double the damage and stuns for 1.5 seconds, as well as creating a massive ice field that slows everyone caught in it before shattering to deal the same damage to everyone again. While this is an amazing long-range stun and can greatly impact a teamfight, it didn't provide nearly the same amount of immediate value as her old ultimate, which was an AoE stun. The main appeal with Sejuani back then was her insane teamfight burst. On screen is a clip of Meteos playing pre-reworked Sejuani and landing a killer 5-man ultimate and permafrost, which not only did quite a solid chunk of damage for a tank, but ultimately won his team the fight. Current Sejuani cannot pull off an engage anywhere near this because her new playstyle is to repeatedly lock down one target with consistent stuns from her Q, E, and ult, which in some situations could be more beneficial, but losing that engage potential really sucked for her performance because people played her specifically for that explosive teamfight. The main difference between old and new Sejuani is that before, all she was able to do was her primary engage. Afterwards, the only thing she really did was be a big bulky meat shield because she had long cooldowns. The new Sejuani doesn't have the same amount of engage potential, but she can do a lot more damage and stun more frequently than she did before. But this change to her gameplay has caused her to be stuck in a sort of limbo. Sejuani deals some really big damage for a tank, more than what you would expect from a dedicated tank anyway, but the damage isn't high enough to where you have to stop what you're doing and focus her down. It's not like she can one-shot you. On the flip side, she's got a lot of crowd control, but she's not the best at area disruption, which ultimately makes her a jack-of-all-trades, master of none. Fighter tanks like Shen, Dr. Mundo, Volibear, and Udyr have much less CC if they have any at all, but in exchange, they do as much damage as an 18-wheeler semi-truck. Sejuani has 4 damaging abilities, but they're all really slow, and not quite high enough to make her an immediate threat the way the other 4 are. Although if given enough time, she can 1v1 a lot of squishy targets since they do basically no damage to her except for Vayne. On the other hand, we have the dedicated tanks like Rammus and Nunu. They still do their fair share of damage, especially the little soccer ball, but their primary goal is disruption, to make it really hard for the enemy team to do anything because they're constantly being slowed, knocked up, locked down, etc. Sejuani just doesn't have an easy way to hold multiple people down in a fight outside of her ultimate slow. Her Q, E, and Glacial Prison stun are all single target, making her really good at chain stunning maybe 1 or 2 champions, but not the entire enemy team. And given how much mobility AD carries and mages are getting as of late, she can get kited extremely easy unless someone else is following up. But one core problem with her design is that she's pretty much the only Vanguard in the game who needs help to do her job. Since Permafrost operates in a similar fashion to Braum's concussive blows, Sejuani requires the aid of her teammates to quickly get 4 stacks of Permafrost to stun that target, which is counterintuitive because tanks are supposed to be the ones to help their carries out, not the other way around. One thing tanks are really good at is their ability to start stuff without needing anyone's permission. Nautilus, Leona, Malphite, and Thresh, to name a few, are such valuable assets to their team due to the on-demand instant engage they provide. But outside of her ultimate, Sejuani cannot get stuns without first landing 4 attacks on a target. Every other Vanguard has on-demand AoE crowd control. She's the only one who doesn't, and even though she does decent damage, she's not a fighter tank, not a juggernaut or diver. The only thing Sejuani brings to the table is her ridiculous survivability. Like I said before, Sejuani is one of the tankiest champions in the game. It takes a ton of DPS and effort to turn that boar into bacon. But over the years, Riot has added so much percent health damage, armor penetration, and true damage that it doesn't matter how much health, armor, and magic resist she has when she can just get melted. See, because of how pervasive the tank meta was 5 years ago, a lot of new champions and champion reworks have been introduced with percent health damage or true damage to make sure they scale well into the late game where tanks become nearly unkillable. There's also a lot better item choices to counter tanks thanks to Season 11. Kraken Slayer, Liandry's Anguish, Rift Maker, Lord Dominic's Regards, Cyrilda's Grudge, Blade of the Ruined King, Black Cleaver, Demonic Embrace, etc. There's also Eclipse and Divine Sunderer which give percent armor penetration for their mid-deck passive, so you can see some champions with 50 or even close to 60% armor pen late game. Back in the day, it took an entire army to bring down Sejuani, but now she can practically get 1v1'd by like a 3-item Kaisa or Yone. So now the way most tanks are staying afloat is by upping their overall damage in a fight, to where carries genuinely have to keep an eye out for the enemy frontline since now the frontline can do a lot of damage. For example, in the top lane we have Poppy, Shen, Sion, Cho'Gath, and Malphite. They all build full tank, but still do crazy amounts of damage, especially against AD carries. In the jungle, we have Volibear, Udyr, and full tank Hecarim to some degree. Heck, even in mid and support, we have champions like Nautilus, Thresh, Leona, and Galio who can do half of a squishy target's health in one combo, building pretty much full tank. These champions are all able to do a lot more damage than ever before, and their role as a tank is mostly defined by just their ability to soak up a lot of hits or stun someone. Traditional tanks like Maokai, Zac, and Sejuani, who rely on their ample crowd control and sustain to do their tanky duties, are losing viability because of how much easier it is to deal with them. Maokai at this point is not even played top anymore, people just play full AP Mao with the saplings down in support these days. Now, ever since her last time in the spotlight in Season 9, Sejuani received a number of damage buffs to try to get her to be relevant again. But those buffs don't change the fact that she lost so much of the immediate burst damage and crowd control that she had before. She still suffers from being mostly single target and taking a while to apply permafrost, which is where the majority of her DPS comes from due to her passive Shatter. They can boost her damage as much as they want, but she'll never do as much damage as a Diver or Juggernaut. They can make her as resilient as they want, but she still won't have the same level of teamfight impact the way Sion, Ornn, or Nunu will. Pre-rework Sejuani was really good because she had one job, and she did that job really well. Right now, she doesn't excel in anything all too much. Even though she has slightly better engage, Sejuani is for all intents and purposes a weaker version of Nunu. They have relatively similar damage, but Nunu has way more crowd control and bigger area coverage in exchange for being slightly less tanky. In all honesty, I think a lot of her current problems can be fixed if they just brought back her old ultimate. Her biggest issue is that she's too slow to contribute any meaningful impact in a fight compared to other tanks. When Riot realized just how pathetic Zac's new ultimate was, they reverted him back to his old one, but they still kept his reworked Q, which was a net positive for him. The new permafrost isn't really all that bad in a vacuum, and I think her new W is a lot better than her old one. But they took away everything about her that made her such a scary tank, which was her instant AoE crowd control. Although I might just be biased, I played Sejuani a ton in Season 6 and early Season 7, and I personally just hated how they made Glacial Prison a single target ability. That thing basically killed her teamfight engage. To all the Sejuani mains out there, what do you think? Do you miss her old kit or do you prefer her the way she is now? Again, I personally think they can keep her passive Q, W, and E the way they are, and just bring back her old ultimate the same way they did with Zac. She's definitely still a viable champion, but the times are against her, and the only way to make her good again is to bring back some of her instant stuff, since the popular tanks nowadays are the ones who either do a lot of damage, like Cho'Gath, Sion, and Volibear, or have really big frontal engage like Nautilus, Leona, and Malphite. If you enjoyed this video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Also, check out the description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as a playlist containing all my Why No One Plays videos if you'd like to watch more. Thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring the channel for a second time. Don't forget to check out the gaming browser to support the channel. But that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon for the next one. Take care.